Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. So, I want to have a discussion here. Technically, a little bit of a follow-up from information from like 10 days ago, give or take. But there's a little bit of information that I missed regarding this particular story, and I also want to kind of tie this in with the potential for DLC going forward. So, first off, a little bit of context. We talked about this in terms of several screenshots going around, talking about the Dark Knight, Onion Knight, stuff like that popping out when they were going and digging through the files. Now, the video you're seeing in the background is from a modder named Gus. He was apparently the original source of those things, from what I understand. Could be wrong on that. Again, this is information any modder could have found, but either way, this is a video of him going and showing what he ended up running into. Now, there's a few bits of information that were not there before in these other stories going around. I guess folks didn't find them as interesting as just like, well, here's War of the Lions classes or what have you. So let's go ahead and talk about how this potentially could relate to either plans that they had or do have for any DLC now or forthcoming. All right, so first of all, the details that are covered in the video. They cover, obviously, Onion Knight, Dark Knight, that sort of thing. We see that they have placeholder spots for the skills that you would expect them to have in their original forms. And then we also see Luso and Balthier, as well as, what's his face, I think it was like Alistair or something from the side quest for Beowulf. Now, the thing is, that's the interesting part. We see the passives already put in there. It was the passives that were already in the game that other classes would have had. But everything that isn't completely retooled from just kind of existing placeholder stuff, they didn't have a chance to go and put them in. They started playing around with them. They didn't have a chance to put in the new stuff. They did, however, start with creating some new sprites for, new characters and what have you. So this kind of implies that they started on the side quests, that they did plan to start doing something with those side quests. Potentially they ran out of time for additional scripting or whatever else. The implication of this, though, is that we potentially were seeing stuff like the Sword and the Order stuff and whatever else, that we were seeing the additional side quests for Chapter 4, which, like, granted, it is what it is, but yeah, that it would have helped flesh out some bits of Chapter 4 there if those were redone in a new way. Now, if they just couldn't get a hold of certain voice actors, if they couldn't do it to time, who knows? But either way, it seems like that stuff was rebuilt for what it's worth. Like I saw some assumption in this video essentially talking about whether or not it was properly rebuilt or using the War of the Lions version. If they did have Wodel, I would have assumed that they probably would have had those mechanics in there, that they wouldn't have had to leave them placeholder. That they, again, if you take a look at any of their lists, like you can see that when it comes to the Sky Pirate, he has all of Mustadio's skills, but he doesn't have any of the additional kind of like reworks of existing stuff, your mugs and whatever else. We see that there's the spots for them, but they never got around to putting them in there. So essentially, that does seem to imply that, again, they started but just got interrupted by some means. And another thing I want to follow up on here is that this sounds very similar to what we saw with the Rogue for Tactics Ogre Reborn. So a little bit of context, for those unfamiliar with Tactics Ogre, essentially we had one class removed in its remake, essentially one that stole consumables, which were no longer necessary for all intents and purposes for its remake. It was a class that essentially had separate drop tables on every single map in the entire game for every unit in the game, that had a trap mechanic that functionally didn't work. There was a lot of weirdness to that particular class, and so it would have essentially required retooling the whole rest of the game to make that one class work. And so as a result, we saw that the NPCs had a version that just used their one remaining useful skill, which was basically a speed up skill, that also could be used by the Buccaneer in that particular instance. But the original Rogue was made NPC only. And again, it didn't really affect anything. It's one of these things that even if somebody goes and, let's say, goes back to it, more likely than not, people would just forget that it was even there. But as far as these other ones go, the way that it's set up, and specifically the reason that we have, specifically the fact that they have Beowulf's kind of counterpart there, it seems like the plan was essentially to implement those later side quests. Now, does this also mean that the multiplayer stuff would have been put in a version made for sane human beings? I don't know. I would really hope so. Like the dream version of this, give or take. Now, I personally, I'm perfectly fine with it as it is. But for those that wanted the War of the Lions version, essentially this would be a sort of best of all worlds kind of scenario, where we see the original version there for the folks that wanted, and then if we have the War of the Lions stuff available as a DLC, with the different classes and with the alternative kind of side stuff and whatever else, that could be potentially what they were looking for. In this particular case, given the overall speed of the Ivalice Chronicles, I gotta say I never missed just how empty Chapter 4 felt until this time. It does definitely put a noticeable dent in that particular section, despite it being longer than some of the other chapters. I guess part of that is also just due to going back to Tactics Ogre Reborn and seeing the absolute just deluge of content from every direction there. But it is weird how even the SNES version of TO actually had dramatically more than FFT ever did in any version. But yeah, no, it's pretty noticeable this time around because you essentially have all this stuff constantly going on for chapters 1 to 3. You get to 4, and it's just a quick little sprint to the end there. You got the Midlights deep if you want it, but realistically speaking, any of your advanced classes can absolutely stomp through the end game, even on Tactician. So, I don't know. It would be nice to see some more stuff added this time around. I'll give them that. Now, as far as the new classes and whatever else, it would be kind of neat if they had, let's say, done something along the lines of, thrown in the idea of those old multiplayer things, but just do what they did with mods, or basically just, if you need a more popular example, go just do what Triangle Strategy did with their maps that they couldn't complete, and just threw them in as bar fights. And yeah, just slap them in there. You get let's say you have to spend some money to go access them, or maybe you need some other resource to go access them. You complete enough of them, you end up potentially unlocking these other characters. You get your Luso, you get your Balthier, or whatever else. Maybe you only unlock that once you get all the Zodiac stones or something. It would be neat. Is the thing. So yeah. Granted, again, please, oh please, do not put them in how they did in War of the Lions. I would hope that they would just have them as a actual obvious trophy. It was very weird that you got Luso, and it's like, here's the next chapter version of Ramzo. We just copy-pasted him. It's like, here's better Mustadio over here. Oh, I'm sorry, we also had that cutscene over there, just to make sure that you understood the Mustadio. The one time he shows any interest in someone, gets friend-zoned pretty darn hard. He gets shut down so hard she doesn't even notice. So we just want to make sure that we really sink in that we don't like Mustadio. It always felt a bit mean, So either way, it sounds to me like there is the potential for DLC. If they were implementing these side quests and whatever else. If they do put in a War of the Lions DLC, presumably it would be that they have those side quests. Maybe they have the multiplayer. Maybe they have these other characters as a reward for that multiplayer. But why is there any reason to even believe any of this nonsense to begin with? Well, we actually see a reason for them to have some DLC already. They left the door open, courtesy of Ramzo. Because they threw in that whole thing with palette swaps. They threw in those alternate costumes for him. And realistically, every single time that kind of stuff has ever happened before, that has always resulted in, future DLC, if at nothing else, at least the costumes. There's a certain bit of ironic funniness that apparently many of us that got pre-order codes cannot access those costumes on on our preferred platform on account of that apparently deleting the pre-order stuff, even though it came with a little note that said you will have the pre-order stuff. But oh well, that doesn't really particularly matter, but it does potentially leave the door open for being able to go get a hold of of stuff like that, which also leaves the door open for further DLC stuff. Maybe they'll bother going and finishing it. From everything that I've heard, it seems to have sold reasonably well, so maybe we'll see it. What's a corporation to do but go and hoover up more money? It seems like exactly the thing that they should do in this case. So, yeah, that's just kind of my thoughts on this particular matter. I think the signs are there, especially given that guy right there, that they were working on the side quests, that they were working on putting them in there, and it got cut short. And given that it wasn't completely dummied out, that this is all information that's still out there, even, a couple of updates later, it's still as it is, so it doesn't seem like they're removing it or whatever else. To me, that sounds like the pieces are there to potentially see some DLC down the line. But either way, my 2 cents on the matter. Apologies for getting to this one a little bit late. Again, I didn't even realize there was a video to those screenshots. It was just one of these cases where information goes through the grapevine, and I don't really always see all of it at once. So there is that. So y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care. Let me know what you think, and yeah, I'll see you later. Take care.